Hey guys, welcome to our SoulFam Podcast, where I interview space holders from all over the world. I'm your host, my name is Karolina, and I am the Connection Catalyst. Today on the show, we have Kashi, the Kundalini Rose, our healing guide. Welcome to the show, Kashi. How are you doing?
Oh, thank you. I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. It's so nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. And I'm so excited because we're gonna touch upon some spicy topics today, like sexuality and tantra, waska, and all these things. So it's really great. I'm super excited to talk about it because sexuality is something that has been a taboo for so long. And I feel like we need to change the consciousness about it in on the planet in general. And we need to talk about it more and more, I feel. So I'm just really happy that you agreed to be on this podcast. So thank you. And I would love to start with actually your nickname, let's say the Kundalini Rose. When did it unfold that you wanted to call yourself that? It's really interesting for me.
Well, hi, and thanks for the intro. And the Kundalini Rose actually isn't that old as a name for me. I initially created it as my brand once I'd already moved to Costa Rica, which was only 2 years ago. I just had my 2 year anniversary. And I as soon as I got to this land, it was like all of this work that had been primarily personal for me and something that I did very naturally, like in my own journey, and then also with pretty much anyone and everyone who I met. It was just very intrinsic on one level. And when I got to Costa Rica, it was in the middle of lockdown, and I like it was like suddenly the energy was there, and the universe was like, you need to make this into like an official business. You need to make this into a brand. You need to, be able to receive abundance from what you do, because I've done it so naturally, forever. It's like whether that's coaching or empowerment or um all of these things, tantra, it's just always been weaved into every conversation, every interaction on so many levels. So I got here and it was like, now is the time. And I didn't even have my own Instagram before then. This was only 2 years ago. So I was like, okay. And the name just came as like, that's the name. And for me, like the significance of it encapsulates so much, because the rose is a really important part of my life. It's a really, it's a lineage, it's a path, and it's a symbol. It's such an ancient symbol. It's a mystic symbol for thousands of years. And it really represents in so many ways the divine feminine. And also, to me, it represents actually the balance of masculine and feminine as well, because you have the rose that is like so feminine and sensual, the petals and the spiral, and um that feminine aspect. And then you have the thorns, it's like she's got these like really sharp swords. And so that for me is also the masculine and the structure of the stem. So in a way, for me, rose in itself represents that union, that balance of the two polarities. And Kundalini, it's just like I've always been on the journey of exploring Kundalini in different ways. I trained in Kundalini yoga. I have very strong Kundalini. So it's just always been, a theme for me. And I think also part of my, now it's just the name that I've gone by for a while. But I think at the time, the reason I loved bringing them together was also because the Kundalini is that Shakti, it's that pure life force energy. So actually, because initially I was only working with women, they were both very feminine symbols, like the Kundalini being that like pure life force, that pure energy, that feminine power. And then the rose also being a symbol of the feminine. But then I came to realize, oh, well, the rose also contains the masculine. And yeah, like the Kundalini is also like, if the rose is like the flowering, the Kundalini is also that like up the spine, kind of like, it's also got like an erect aspect to it. So I just
Mhm.
like love to play with the masculine and feminine in all of it.
Amazing. I love that. I absolutely love that. And so, how did your spiritual journey start? And I'm guessing you already mentioned before we started recording, this was a long time ago, but it's very interesting for me to ask everyone about their journey because people just come from so many different places and their spiritual awakening happened in so many different ways that it would be great if you can share with us at least some of your journey in a shortcut.
I know it's really hard for me to shortcut, but because for me, I've been on the spiritual path my whole life. Like I didn't really have what some people have where they're like living one way and they have this one experience that just shatters their reality and changes everything. I was super hungry for spirituality since the age. I was writing like pagan poetry. My mom showed me some that I'd written age literally like 4 or 6. Like this very kind of like pagan-esque, like celebrating nature and the elements. I was really blown away. I read this like a few years ago. I was like, I wrote that at like 4 or 6 years old. And then I became very interested in Christianity because I had that was almost like the closest spirituality that I had to grasp around me at the time. So I became very into Christianity. I read the Bible like avidly at about 8 years old. And then, I had to go to church in school and I had this very rebellious attitude. And I remember being in church and being like, the divine doesn't want us all in this kind of like very rigid, obligatory experience. The divine wants us like outside in the sunshine dancing, And then I became I got into like rave culture in London and I got into, parties and then festivals that were all about freedom and actually very hedonistic. But that for a certain period of time became like my spiritual, it was like church for me, dancing for hours and hours and hours. That became my church. So it was funny because that vision that I had in school really actually came to be my experience. And it also introduced me, those dance floors were sort of opening a pathway into more shamanic experiences through dance, because dance is has been a big part of my journey. So dance embodiment was always really key. I was very into yoga. I was like religious about doing yoga in my 20s. And I went to India, I went to ashrams. I was just hungry for all of it. I was like, whatever it is, I was like a spiritual shopper. I was like, wanted to try everything. And I had a lot of experiences that kind of like made me check myself and woke me up to whatever. It wasn't all love and light. And I had to, go through a lot of initiations. And in my later 20s, I met someone called Johnny Daw, who's an amazing artist, musician, healer, visionary. And I started working with him and he mentored me in my personal journey quite a lot. And he was a big catalyst for my awakening, like next level awakenings and initiations in ways that I would never have imagined. Because when I met him, I was very hedonistic and I was living a very gypsy lifestyle. And when I met him, I was working in LA in fashion. I had to integrate a new level of discipline, a new level of masculine in my life where I've been very wild and free before. So that was a whole other phase, And then since coming to Costa Rica, all of what I learned on my path, all the most powerful modalities, the most effective healing technologies, I bring those together in my work, and I share them with others. It's like, it's almost like life didn't want me to teach or really bring this to the world until I'd really done a lot of the groundwork within myself. And I'd integrated, so much of what I now share. So it's like, well, hopefully I've integrated everything that I share, or at least most of it, because I like to teach from an embodied place, not from a place of like, I read this somewhere. So part of my path was also just like, I cut off all the books. I didn't read for 10 years. I was really on this inward journey of clarifying myself. So yeah, it's had lots of different phases essentially. But yeah, it's always been there. It's always been like the red thread in my life. It's like spirituality. I always prioritized it. Like people I knew were making decisions about their lives, about their careers, about their future based on all these other factors. And for me, it was like, that was always number one. It was like, where was my soul calling me? Where was my heart calling me? So that's what I always followed.
Beautiful. It's so nice when this started in childhood, right? And then we're like coming back there and reading all that or seeing the drawings we've made, and we're like, what the hell? Oh my God, I was freaking woke at that time.
Totally,
It's
because
so
you're a
funny.
soul, and it's like, I've really learned more and more to see people like that, even children, you know, and like, it's like, sometimes I look at children and I'm like, I mean, I love kids. Like, I am just like, I'm in love with like all children to a certain degree. But then also when you see everyone as a soul, sometimes I see the kids and I'm like, I'm not actually, I'm like going beyond this, like, oh, you're so cute. And I'm actually looking into the soul. And sometimes it's not that cute what you see in the soul. You know, it's like we all have like whatever age we are, whatever presentation we are, it's like we are souls in meat suits, essentially. I don't usually use that word, but you know, it's like
It's
that
a funny word to use,
soul
though.
is what remembers. You know, when we first, you know, when we're young, it's like that soul piece of us already knows so much. So for me, a lot of the spiritual path was actually decluttering my consciousness from all the education that I'd had, from all of the input society had given me, and actually coming back to the remembrance of my soul and coming back to the power that was like really my true power, and it was not like an externally sourced power. It was the power, it was the practices, it was the devotion, it was all of that which I cultivated over lifetime. So of course, when we come in as children like that, I mean, you pictures of me when I was a baby, I was so intense. I was like, you could see it in my face. I was like, I'm on a mission, you know? So it's like, depending on what your soul history is, shapes a lot of how you experience this incarnation. And the more we see it like that, then the more also compassion we can have also for ourselves and other people.
Yeah, absolutely. I resonate with what you're saying a lot. And so, how did the Tantra Huasca come about? Because I'm guessing that from the name, that it's like a combination of Tantra and ayahuasca. So I'm also guessing then that Mother Ayahuasca, or grandmother Ayahuasca rather, was part of your awakening, let's say, or some of the awakenings that you mentioned. So, what is Tantra Huasca?
Oh, thank you for the question. I mean, she was a big part of my awakening, still is. When I was in my early 20s, I discovered ayahuasca, and I actually discovered ayahuasca, came out of Glastonbury Festival, went straight into an ayahuasca ceremony, my first one, which was just above Glastonbury High Street. Glastonbury is, you know, it's a sacred place in England, for those that don't know, and it was a very powerful initiation, that first ceremony. And I was in love. I was like, wow, this is a medicine that can really take me to my depths. You know, I think I always knew I had a lot of depth, and I was always very hungry to reveal it to myself primarily. And so ayahuasca was like, wow, okay, like this is a tool, a spirit, a medicine that can help me go really far and really deep. And I always had that desire. So I drank quite a lot of ayahuasca in my early 20s, and it was a big part of my path. And what's interesting is that a lot of what was happening in those ceremonies, a lot of the healing I was going through, it took on a whole new context. Not a new context, but like a conscious context. 10 years later, 15 years later, you know, it's like I was integrating it. My life was showing me how to integrate it, even after I stopped, because like I stopped reading books, I stopped drinking ayahuasca, I stopped all the things at a certain point because I was like, okay, I actually want to, yeah, like come back to more
Integrated all.
stillness. And yeah, more, and yeah, exactly, and integrate it all. So yeah, so I left her behind in that sense. She never left me. I just stopped actually, you know, attending ceremonies. She was always very, very much with me. I mean, I can talk about that forever, but I won't right now. But essentially, about a year and a half ago, I reconnected with a dear sister. Her name is Millie Moonstone. She's a wonderful, wonderful human being. We met when we were about 20 and had actually, you know, we met within the context that we were both exploring Tantra, and we were very into freedom and liberation and sexuality and all sorts of things in our early 20s. And we reconnected 2 years ago. And in that time, we had hardly seen each other. But she around the time I'd stopped drinking ayahuasca, she started drinking ayahuasca regularly. And she also had fallen in love with a wonderful man from Brazil who initiated her. He was serving ayahuasca. And so she was playing music with him, and he initiated her. And really sadly, he actually passed away at the beginning of COVID. So she like took on the mantle and continued the lineage, essentially, which is an amazing lineage. Very direct from Maestro Eneo and Padre Sebastião and all these, out of Brazil. So they have a beautiful retreat center in Brazil that they created together that Millie is now the mama of. And we reconnected, and just Tantra Huasca was a vision the two of them had had. But as soon as she said the word, which was combining Tantra and ayahuasca, as soon as she said that to me, I was like, it went through my whole body. And we were like, oh my God. Like, I was initially going to go and do it with her. And then that particular retreat didn't work out, and we ended up co-creating it together. So we had the first one in October, and it's all women. So it's very specific. It's all women, it's Tantra, and it's ayahuasca. And it's so profound. It was so profound for every single person who was a part of it. There is so much safety that we create. There is so much depth because we're combining these practices that take you very deep in themselves with the medicine. And it really allows women to not censor themselves in the ceremony experience. Also, the way Millie serves, it's like people can go out into the nature. It's like there's a lot of sovereignty and flexibility in the way that she holds the space, but also there's a lot of safety. And there's a weak container. So people just go, I mean, the rebirth, the transformation, the healing that happened was absolutely exquisite. So we're so excited about doing it again. We're going to run it in April and also in October this year.
Oh, beautiful. That sounds amazing. All feminine energy and feminine energy of ayahuasca as well. That sounds awesome. Tantra Huasca. I love this name as well. Like, I would totally go for something like this.
Yeah, it really calls people. It's like, I actually just wrote a post on this. It's like some people, they're like, Tantra and ayahuasca, like they're like, whoa, like what, like how, like what, like they're just like, oh, that sounds like a lot. And then other people, they just get it, And I think the reason also some people don't get it is because there's a lot of, I don't want to say prejudice, but there's a lot of preconceived ideas about what is Tantra and what is ayahuasca and what would that look like when you put them together. But actually, the space that we create has so much integrity. And like people also often assume that Tantra is about like people sharing sexual energy, and like I don't know, like orgies or strange kind of practices or whatever. People don't necessarily know. But it's really this very pure way of working with sexual energy on an individual basis, with the support of the medicine and with these practices that activate Kundalini, that cultivate that sexual energy and that freedom to allow women to explore that in their own way, because it really, the medicine works everybody in a very different way as well. So yeah, it's very exquisite what happens, and you have like so much nature, like we're in Costa Rica in the jungle, and there's just so much nature that supports these women to come back to their nature.
Yeah, I love Costa Rica. It always hugs me when I'm there. It's just the nature, the jungle is just, it's a kind of like a Mother Earth just giving me a hug when I'm there. It's just constantly, yeah, it's just amazing. I'm going there in March actually, so I'm so excited. Awesome. So I would love to talk a little bit about the erotic alchemy, right? Because like this is also what we probably can do within ourselves when we practice tantra, because as you said, it doesn't have to be with someone else. We can practice tantra within and just learn how to, let's say, direct this sexual energy within ourselves with the breathing, with the practices. And so I'm curious to know, how do you alchemize the erotic energy? Because like that's what it is, right? We're just creating alchemy, so we transform the energy somehow. So I would love you to tell us a little bit about that.
I love this question. For me, the focus is less about transforming the energy and more about allowing the energy to transform us. So it's like that pure, raw sexual energy is naturally alchemical. It's naturally healing. It's naturally transformative. So I often talk about the two alchemical keys that nature has blessed us with. One is that Shakti, that Kundalini, that sexual energy. And the other is our presence, our consciousness, our awareness, which is more like the masculine key, right? And when we bring those two together, we can alchemize literally anything. It's like the darkest wound, the biggest trauma, all of this lives in our body, ultimately. So sexual energy is very physical, yeah? It's like of this world. It's also the energy that created us. So it's intrinsically pure, it's intrinsically powerful, and it's naturally healing. So when we cultivate it for ourselves, first of all, because so many people are trained, programmed that sexual energy is something that they just share with someone else. It's like literally for someone else, you know, and we're just so used to like giving it away. But what a lot of my work is focused on is supporting men and women to learn how to cultivate that energy, circulate that energy. So we're not necessarily transforming the energy, but we're moving it around the body. And as we allow it to rise and move around the body, it not only nurtures us, nourishes us, it also transforms. It alchemizes the wounds, the pain, the blockages. It's like that river, you know, it's like a river that actually can wash clean these areas of our beings and our psyches that have become stagnant, have become blocked, that are holding frozen trauma. And so, yeah, working with sexual energy just on an internal level, there's so much alchemy that can happen, especially when you bring consciousness to it and you're doing it with that intention of like, this is for my healing, you know, whether that is self-pleasure, whether that is a sexual experience with someone else, whether that is just like, you know, I teach yoni yoga a lot, which is working with the jade egg practice, which is where you're just like cultivating that energy, and then you're bringing it to different parts of the body, like using your hands, you know, just cultivating it through breath and through certain physical movements. So that alchemy is happening all the time within us, and the more we can like direct the flow of our energy, remove the blockages, and bring intention and consciousness and awareness to ourselves, like to our bodies, there's so much healing that happens. But we're just so conditioned to like explode our energy all the time and to focus on like what's outside ourselves. So even though this is very simple, it's something that's seemingly new to a lot of people.
Absolutely. And I love how we are using the word cultivate in here, because it's literally cultivating it. So it's not like, oh, I have a goal and I want to come and I just want to, I just want to feel this energy and like let it flow through me. It's actually just staying with it, staying present with it, moving it around, feeling it all over your body. Not just like, okay, I'm horny, so I'm just gonna have an orgasm, I'm just gonna masturbate and that's it. And like 15 minutes, I'm done, I'm just gonna watch some porn and whatever. It's actually just like arousing, and then you don't even have to come, you don't even want the end goal in there. You just want to create this energy and just transfer it and just play with it as well. And I love it, because to me it's been one of the really most empowering tools on my journey to actually like create this energy within me, whether I have a partner or not, and to just really utilize it for creativity, for just having more power. And I realized that like sometimes even not coming, not, creating the whole burst of the energy is sometimes even better, because then I'm just like, okay, I have all this energy now. I need to like direct it somewhere, and, I can do stuff. I can just, be more energized with it. And then of course for women and men it's different when it comes to like orgasming and how this energy is let's say created and where it goes, and we probably gonna touch upon that as well. But I just wanted to share my experience that for me it's one of the most powerful energies that I create within myself. And if I add self-love to it and just gratitude for my body and for everything that happens inside of the body, it's just such a powerful tool. So I totally believe in this erotic alchemy, as you beautifully put it. I really know that it works. It just works.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. And I guide, Erotic Alchemy is the name of an online course, the 6-week program container that I hold women in from all around the world. And like the journey that they go through, like the transformation that happens. And you're right, it's like that energy is connected to your creativity. It's like in Tantra, often the focus is not about that end goal, that orgasm, that kind of like, again, that's very masculine orientated, like end goal focus, as opposed to like just being present with the energy and trusting your body to know where the energy needs to go. Because also we can have so many different types of orgasms, and often people get very focused on like a certain kind. But when you go deeper, it's like there are certain kinds of orgasms as well that implode the energy, so that the energy stays more inside, it's more contained. And that's where a lot of tantra and tantric practices are focused on longevity, because when we master this energy, we also live longer. We have more life force, because it is our life force. And it also makes us a lot harder to control, because a man or a woman who's really mastered their sexual energy and idea, like sexual energy and emotional energy, it's like you can't control these kind of people. They're not susceptible to manipulation. But if you're run by your sexual energy, or if your sexual energy is running you, then you're much easier to control in general. So it's a big theme, the repercussions of when an individual reclaims this energy in them and reclaims themselves from outside influences that have always told them how to use this energy. Yeah, the impact is huge. The ripples are far reaching.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why we're talking about it, to inspire people to try it and to cultivate it. So it's so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing all that. And so I have this question that I think is going to be my favorite question of this podcast, because I was wondering to ask you, and I probably asked this maybe at some point to someone, but this time I would like to ask it from like a sexual viewpoint. What is the number one thing that men should know about the sexuality of women, and women should know about the sexuality of men?
Just so many things, but what comes to me straight away is it's a very basic, um, yeah, it's a very basic thing, and it can be the same thing for both. It's essentially that women, their sexual energy, it's more like water coming to the boil. So when a woman, if you're a man and you want to bring a woman into real opening, into really deep arousal, then first of all, there has to be safety, right? But essentially, to understand that her sexual energy, the way she gets activated, it's more like from all over her body. It's like focused like all the extremities, like the whole from the outside, and then it travels to her yoni, and then her yoni will open, right? Another important side note, I know I'm saying a few things here, but like anyway, it's also like penetrate her heart, penetrate her emotionally first, and then the yoni opens. So essentially it's like you want to activate and penetrate her in all the places before the yoni, right? And then it's like she slowly comes to the boil. Yeah, she takes time. But once she's hot, she can stay hot for a really long time. Whereas men are literally the opposite. So it's like he gets activated more like fire from the genitals, from his cock, and then it spreads to his heart, opens his heart, and the rest of his body gets activated. So it's literally the opposite for men and women. And I think if we really understood that, more as a society, then each gender would have, more awareness of how to approach the other, because I think that physical, that's kind of like an explanation of the physical, but then you can translate that into other realms. Yeah, it's like how to approach a woman, to ask her out on a date, or like whatever. It's like it's a metaphor for many things, but having that basic awareness of our difference. And I know I'm adding, but just the safety is so important for women, It's like the safety is so important, and the presence that he gives her. So
Presence, yeah, that's number one. And if actually it was like you're saying, I feel like porn industry would look completely differently. I feel like porn movies would be so long because they would show the whole journey of like the woman boiling, right? And it'll be like, okay, like a 3 hours long porn video, not like 5 minutes, because now it's all like very much masculine, right, in its approach. But I feel like that actually harms us as women, but also men, because then they like think that it's happening like in that they have seen in the porn videos, but it's actually the opposite. And then it's like, what the hell am I supposed to do? And that's why it's so important to talk about it. And thank you for mentioning it, because yeah, I feel like we should also have like feminine porn in a way. I feel because
right, like
I don't know if
tantric.
it
Yeah, I mean,
exists.
I think there are people doing more alternative now, like things like that. Um, the thing about porn is it's just it floods the brain with dopamine, and men are very susceptible to getting addicted because they are so, men are more focused on the visual stimulation. So porn is all about that. It's like fast, it's visual, it's such a narrow perspective on sex, but the chemical impact on the brain is so dangerous and addictive and damaging, and it ends up long term actually making it harder for a man to be present in the act of lovemaking, because he's running all these videos in his subconscious. you know? So that takes
Yeah, and
away the
cares about
presence.
performance too.
Yeah, and it takes away his presence because it's like he's less able to be just in the here and now with that woman. And then she feels that, you know, because presence, full presence is what actually awakens more of her era. So it just ends up being, you know, on some level, it's an education tool, but I think it's just like, for me, I dream of it, a world and a day where like porn is not the way that most people get educated about sex anymore. You know, that we have real sex education and education about sexual energetics. Because most people, they just get taught the physical. And there's so much more to it. But when we're uninformed, we can't make conscious choices. And then we accumulate all sorts of experiences that are often traumatic to the body, sometimes often traumatic to body, mind, psyche, and whatever. And that creates all sorts of wounds and blockages that then we have to work through in order to actually experience our full sexual potential. But if we're educated in the first place about the truth of our sexual energy and sexual potential, then hopefully we could skip that in between part, which involves often a lot of trauma, a lot of trial and error, a lot of, yeah. So
Yeah, and if we could also communicate, because I feel like people are just shy to communicate their desires, their needs, and how they feel in bed because they maybe are scared that they will make their partner or whoever they are having the sexual intercourse with, that they will feel not enough or whatever, right? And then it creates just this whole snowball effect of just disaster, really. Sexual
yeah,
disaster.
there's still so much taboo. And what I find, especially in my work with women, it's like when I get, you know, when there's a group of women that come together and we start talking about these things and like really the like realities and the energetic truth really about sex. It's like all these women, like women know this stuff. Everybody knows this in their subconscious. But when a conversation suddenly happens that actually addresses it consciously and like validates all of that subconscious knowing, the feminine is just like, it's such a liberation for her because she's like finally empowered in what her body has always been telling her and what her consciousness has also been like nudging and hinting at, but she hasn't necessarily had that external validation. And meanwhile, she just goes around kind of imitating everyone else and trying to be like the movies or whatever. And it's, yeah, so it's the conversations are so important. And this is how women typically shared wisdom. You know, it was conversations, it was the red tent, it was around the fire, it was these oral traditions of like telling the stories of the sisters and the grandmothers. And this is how women educated each other in the feminine ways. And sadly, that had to go underground, you know, because there were witch hunts and there was a patriarchy and it became dangerous. But like these things like your podcast, you know, and like all these different new ways of remembering and sharing and communicating about these very, very important topics are blossoming. And that's really exciting.
Yes, and that's why I would love to ask you one more question before we close this beautiful interview about the men's work, because I know that recently you've been diving more into that. And so, like, what is the what guidance do you offer that, you know, for men, and what are the most typical, let's say, obstacles that men have when it comes to sexuality, and, you know, like the typical problems and how to solve them as well, or maybe like to mention a few or just the most frequent ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, one of the biggest problems for men is premature ejaculation. Really, just to like that's really a statistic, which I forget the exact, something like 75% of men ejaculate within 2 to 5 minutes of penetration.
75?
Yeah, it's
Whoa.
something, I don't quote me exactly, but it's something
Whoa.
like that, which is shockingly high. And there's so many reasons for this. And again, a lot of it comes down to education and a lack of education about sexual energetics. You know, in the old days, there were initiations for men. Men would be sent to the temples where older women would initiate them into how to be with a woman. And we don't have that anymore. Instead, men are watching porn that they find on the internet, or boys even at a young age. So there's a lot of distortion. And, you know, again, changing the chemicals in the brain and a lack of ability to be present, which even things like social media, our whole culture is like, it's almost like the antithesis of a supportive environment to help men cultivate real presence. So learning ejaculation mastery, it's not just about pleasing a woman in bed. It's not just about, being able to last longer or have tantric sex. It's about mastering your sexual energy and mastering yourself. It's about mastering your power. It's about reclaiming your primal power. Because again, men have become very unsure about that because of movements like Me Too and because there has been so much trauma. The feminine has suffered at the hands of the masculine, but the masculine has also suffered. And so the trauma on both sides, and men, now it's like, oh God, can I touch her? Is it okay? Does she want me to approach her? So then they abandon that dark masculine that knows how to hunt, that knows how to ravish, that knows how to, track the feminine, because they're not sure it's allowed anymore. And then you get women who are like, we want that. We're like, where is that? Where's it gone? So it's like, there's so much healing in just shedding light on this conversation. But when men really come back into that sexual power and they learn how to be present in their genitals and not just be operating from up here from the mind, it's like you can tell a man who's embodied, he walks a different way and he is so much more anchored in his power and he's the stronger protector. That's when a man can really be a warrior, and like a warrior, not in the sense of violence, but a warrior as in a protector, a warrior of truth, of light, and actually stand in his power and stand for whatever he wants to stand for, essentially, So that's a really key practice. And I teach that in my men's course, which is called Seeded Potential. And it's a 4-week online journey. Because there are certain tantric tools, there are ways, that men learn this that are not also healthy, right? Because some men are like, okay, I mustn't come. And then they kind of like end up, they don't know how to circulate the energy. They end up suffering quite a lot and can actually cause disease if they're doing that practice in the wrong way. So learning how to really master that energy and circulate it and use it for their own healing. Again, whether, it's the same for men as for women. When we do that work internally and we actually cultivate that sexual energy and we learn how to alchemize within us, then we're able to meet each other from a place of wholeness and a place of power. And that's truly world changing.
Yeah, absolutely. Because then we don't attract someone based on all our wounds. We attract someone based on the truth of who we are, really, the whole being, that whole authentic essence that we are. So that's beautiful. And I'm grateful that there are people like you who do this work and spread the message. It's really so valuable. So thank you so much for doing what you do. Because I feel like nowadays with, our era of like information and everything, we need these kind of things in the internet, right? We need this kind of content, like the actual sexual education and talking about tantra and the spiritual side of it. I feel like that's the most crucial, because sometimes you can have a sexual experience that it's not even without even touching someone or with the full on clothes on. I've had these experiences and I know sometimes they have been even more powerful for me internally than the ones, the clothes off and everything, just because of the energy and the soul connection that I would experience. So thank you so much for doing what you're doing. And so one last little question to you is, where could people follow you and find your content and everything if someone got really, vibing with you in here and they would love to know more?
Yeah, thank you. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. Like I could unpack so many of these topics so much more. But yeah, because there's so much to say. And everything you just mentioned, even I could speak to so much of it. But I guess if anyone wants to continue the conversation, you can find me at kundalini.rose on Instagram. And my website is kundalinirose.co. So that has information about different ways you can work with me, my online courses. And if Tantra Huasca speaks to you, then the website is tantrahuasca.com. And that has information about the upcoming retreats in Costa Rica. So
Beautiful. And I love that you run retreats in Costa Rica. It's literally my favorite country in the world. And I've traveled a lot in my life, but Costa Rica is just like, it's just such a beautiful place. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being on this podcast with us, sharing your wisdom and your beautiful energy. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and hope to see you in person in Costa Rica one day.
Yes. Let's continue the conversation.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.